Greetings, everyone. My name is Sanjiv Venkatram, and welcome to another edition of User Delight with Microsoft Technology. What we're going to do today is to look at functions in Power Apps, also called as Power FX. And this is going to be an introduction for people who are getting their feet wet in Power Apps. So when you look at functions in Power Apps, you can categorize them into Power Apps functions by themselves, and then the functions as it relates to the Power Apps controls. When we further drill down into the functions themselves, you can look at them as carrying parameters or without parameters. As an example, user here carries no parameters in between these brackets. They are parameterless functions. And a classic example is user.email or image and so on and so forth that gives us access to tables within Microsoft 365, or something like now that actually gives us the date and time, so on and so forth. And with parameters, you would actually look at something like filter, which would essentially filter a table based on a condition. So what goes in between these brackets essentially are parameters. Likewise with lookup, concatenate, so on and so forth, right? And then when we do these functions with parameters, such as filter, they act on Power Apps controls. As an example, you could filter a gallery, you could filter a data table, you could filter maybe a drop-down, so on and so forth, okay? So let's go over to Power Apps and look at this. So when I go over to Power Apps here, it's a clean slate. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually look at two distinct tables, right? So there is a table here called transaction expense. It's got a few columns such as, country, currency, forex, expense, so on and so forth. And then there is a master country table here that actually has, it's a master table. So it basically has country here as a distinct entry. Likewise currency and forex and so on and so forth. So what we do is we try to filter this table to actually get at a smaller table, maybe to get at just a column, let us say only the currency column, then let us get to a single row, and then let us get to a single cell, right? So from one table using PowerFX formulas, we do four things: a smaller table, a column within a table, a line item, and a single item. Okay, so let's see how we do that. And while we do this, we understand the PowerFX formulas, right? So if I were to go over to my Power Apps, and let us say we start off from the left going to the right, and I'm just going to look at functions without parameters. So I'm literally going to go insert a text label here. And in the text label, I'm going to make this a little bigger. I'm going to reference my email, right? So in Microsoft 365, there is a table called the user table, which actually has, let us say, email, the full name, so on and so forth. And let's see how to access the email here, right? For which I'm going to refer to the user function. So I'm going to type user, click on IntelliSense because I'm not great at spellings. And then I'm going to add these two brackets inside which I'm not going to actually pass any parameters. So if you remember back in high school, you had f of x as a function. Here, there isn't an x. It is a parameterless function called user, which takes essentially, basically, in order for you to bring it to life, you put the function down, two brackets. And then what you do is, if you were to use a dot here or a period, it allows you to drill down into the function. So it allows you to get to the properties within the function. And this follows a hierarchy, right? You can go from one property down to the property that corresponds to the higher level property, so on and so forth, using dots. We'll see that more later when we look at controls. But for now, I'm just going to use a property called email. And lo and behold, it actually gives us the email of, the user, whoever is actually logged in. Likewise, I could remove the email here and I could say dot the full name, and it gives you the name of the person who's actually logged in, okay? Now, the now function, let us say, works the same way. I'm just going to say now open the bracket, close the bracket. I'm not going to pass any parameters. And in this case, there are no properties per se for this function. If I enter the function just the same way it is, it actually gives me the date and time, right? So this is basically looking at the functions without parameters and using the dot or a period after this to, let us say, look at the drill down of these functions, whether it gives us one property or it gives us many other properties. You just drill down, right? Essentially, you're going, what I mean by that is it gives you a little bit of a hierarchy to access the properties of the functions, okay? Like user.email. Sorry to reiterate this, but I think you get the point, okay? So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert here a data table, and within the table, I'm going to bring in this table from SharePoint called transaction expense that you just saw. So I'm going to click on this, and this goes away and loads the table, right? Like so, it loads the table like so. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to remove the attachment because we don't visualize attachments inside a table. So as you can see, the data source, the items of the data source for this is transaction expense. Now, if I want to filter this to show only the countries here that correspond to Singapore, I need to filter this table much like I would actually filter something in Excel, right? So if I were to use the function called filter, I'll use a function called filter, open the bracket here, and I'm going to remove, let us say, transaction expense here, right? Just for us to see the syntax. So if I were to say filter, what it basically does is it says, hey, Sanjiv, give me the table that you want to filter. And I'm going to basically say transaction expense. And out here, as you can see from the syntax, it basically says, give me the source, comma, the condition or the logical test, right? So this filter function takes a parameter called source that is being filtered by a particular condition, right? So I'm going to say comma here, and then I'm going to say give me the title here, title, and set it equal to Singapore, and set it equal to Singapore, and I'm going to close the bracket. So what it does is that it filters this transaction table to only Singapore. So as you can see here, this function takes transaction expense and a filter condition to complete, okay? So from this table, let us say I just want to get the currency column. So what I'm going to do is much the same way as I did with the user. Once I actually filter this, I'm going to use a dot here, and I'm going to say give me only the currency, right? Give me only the currency. So now what has happened is this whole entire table has been filtered only to currency, right? I can't see anything else. So in fact, what I'm going to do is I don't need the rest. I'm just going to actually say, hey, look, remove the title, remove, let us say, the Forex, remove expense, so on and so forth, right? Like so, and I could just remove everything here and leave only the currency column. I hope you get the point here, right? Right? Like so. I mean, I can keep removing them one by one, but in essence, what I'm trying to do is only to get the currency column. In fact, a better representation here might actually be a gallery. So I'm just going to delete this guy. I'm going to insert what is called as, let us say, a gallery here, a gallery. Like so. I'm going to basically say give me a blank vertical gallery, and then we are going to do the same exact thing here as well. So I'm going to basically go up. I'm going to say, hey, look, give me filter the gallery items, and it corresponds to the transaction expense, and then the title or equals Singapore, right? The title equals Singapore. So, and I'm going to put Singapore obviously in double quotation marks because I want it to be a string. And then I'm going to go click on this template. I'm going to insert a text label, and in this, as you can see, and I'm going to make this smaller as well. So as you can see, I just get Singapore here. But then if I were to replicate this Control V, and I can actually say this item dot currency, and I can get the currency here. You see, SGD and so on and so. So I've actually filtered a gallery to only show Singapore, right? And then equally, if I go ahead, I mean, in this case, I could just remove Singapore here as a text label and only have my currency. But what I could also do is I could say in this, just give me the currency. That's it. Just give me the currency. And as you can see, it only gives us the currency. So this whole gallery has been filtered only to currency. You follow? So I filtered down from a filtered table to only the currency as a column. Okay, so this is what the dot actually does, much the same way you did user.email. Here it's whatever the filter table dot currency is, just that this function actually took parameters inside. Okay, so now that I actually have a table in which I just have the currency column, let us see how I could actually get down to one line item. So to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove this currency because I want to showcase other columns as well. So I'm going to basically say, hey, this is Singapore. That's fine. I'm going to actually get the currency here. So I'm going to say currency. And then I'm going to basically add another one here, Control V. I'm going to put this down here. I'm going to basically say Forex, right? So my goal here is to basically get the first line item. I don't want the second line item. I just want the first line item. So conveniently, there is a formula called first. So what I could do is I could say, give me the first line item of this entire table, right? And as you can see here, a line item in the IT world is a record. So basically, it just gives me one record, which is the first line item. Follow? So we went from a filter table that had 2 lines as Singapore. And in this, I actually sought only one line item. Now, what I could also do is from here, I could say, hey, look, give me just one value. Give me the Forex that actually corresponds to this particular line item, right? So I get a line item here, but I just need the Forex value of 1. So then I could just say dot Forex, isn't it? I could just say dot Forex, and that would give me just one number. Now, clearly, this will work in a text box because I'm looking at a text here. It's actually a gallery. So, this formula is not relevant here. So I'm going to basically just remove the Forex here for now. But what I'm going to do is close the bracket, right? So we get the line item. So what I'm going to do here is make this a little smaller. But what I'm going to do though is I'm going to insert a text box, and in the text box I'm just literally going to copy this formula, and I'm going to say give me, and obviously this is going to cry because it is a record and the text can only take a text, right? So I'm going to say give me only, let us say in this case, the currency, right? And lo and behold, it gives me the currency. You see? So let us understand what I did here. So I'm going to move this gallery down. I'm going to move it down. I'm going to move this text box. So let's reiterate this. And I'm going to add back the table. So I'm going to say insert data table. And I'm going to basically make this a bit smaller. And I'm going to essentially add a filter condition to this table. And I'm going to say filter transaction expense such that the title equals Singapore, right? Singapore. And that gives me, the 2 line items. So what have I done? I've taken the original transaction expense table. I have filtered it to only get Singapore using this as a parameter, right? From there, I further basically said in this filtered table, just give me the first line item, and it gives me the very first line item, Singapore, SGD, so on and so forth. In this gallery, if I were to add other labels, I could get expense, so on and so forth. So I get the first line item. Then I basically go to a text box and I say, in this first row, just give me the currency. So I basically use a dot, much like I do when I do the user function, and then I just get the currency. Okay, so I could also get this line item, instead of getting it in a gallery, I could get it in a form. So I could basically go insert and edit form here, and then editable form. Put this down here like so to the right of this table. I'm going to say give me just one, how do you say, column of items. The data source is going to be transaction expense. But what I'm going to do though is I'm going to basically say, hey, look, the item property of this form, I'm going to basically say data table 1 or data table 3, I believe is the bigger table, data table 3 dot selected, right? So when I do this data table dot selected, essentially I'm using PowerFX and saying, in this case, I'm shifting the context to a control, right? If I were to look at this gallery here, the formula, right, or let us say the data table 3, just because we are referencing it to the form, right? So if I were to look at this data table 3, I'm using the filter condition not on a particular control, but actually on a data source. So the parameter inside is actually the data source. Whereas when I look at this item property of this form, I am referencing the control, the data table control, not the data source, but this particular table, right? And then I use a property called selected of the data table by using the dot function, or by using a period. Follow? Right? Much the same way as I've done here in this gallery, I said, or let me actually go to the text label here. I said dot currency, so just give me the currency column. Likewise, in this form, I'm saying, hey, just give me whatever is selected as a line item in the data table. And how do I get this property called selected? By referencing the dot. Follow? Right? So the dot is basically used either in the PowerFX function itself or in a control to actually drill down to the next layer of properties. And I could go further. I could say data table dot selected dot, and then look at, let us say, a title, something like that, right? This is what I mean, right? Title. And this is not going to work in this case because it's just a label. But if I want the line item, I'm just going to say give me that selected line item, and it goes away and fills out the form. Okay, I trust this actually gives you a proper introduction to PowerFX formulas. And once again, to reiterate, there are functions with parameters like the one that we just did right now. And if I go to data table 3 over here, the transaction expense and this title equal to Singapore is a filter condition. That is a parameter to the filter function, right? And then if I go to this form here and look at the item property, the data table dot selected allows you to actually get down to the property of the basic control. Okay, so I just wanted to give you this introduction so that you don't get confused between the periods. When do I use a period? When do I use a formula or a comma? Well, it is, if you want to get down to the properties, you use a period. But within a particular condition, a formula or a function, if you want to go to the conditions, you would actually use a comma. Okay, so as an example out here, if I were to go over to, let us say, the data table, transaction expense is the table that I want to filter, comma, the condition. You follow? And that comes right off of the filter formula, right? I mean, the filter function, when you put the syntax in, it gives you this, right? That you need to actually select a data source, and then you add a comma, and then the condition. Okay, so I hope it is very clear to you as to when to use a comma and when to use a period. Okay, Thank you very much, folks. So what we'll do in future videos is maybe look at some variables as well, because variables come in variety of forms, and it really helps us get down to certain interesting scenarios. Okay? Thank you very much.